I remember the scent of a spring forest. The damp earth after rain, the sharp aroma of pine, the nervous fluttering of birds disturbed by our horses. The sun filtered through the trees like a blessing, and we, the older barons, were relaxed, riding behind the young king who galloped ahead, laughing as if he were immortal. But then there was a sound I still hear in my sleep. A scream. A hoof strike. The sickening crack of a body hitting the ground. Louis, our young king, lay motionless, his limbs twisted like a broken doll. His horse bolted. His helmet rolled into the underbrush, and suddenly silence fell. One of the knights knelt beside him, placing fingers on his neck, then looked up and whispered, "He's gone." No one spoke. Only the wind moved through the branches, and the birds, now quiet, watched us from the trees. I felt a coldness seep into my bones, not from the air, but from the weight of history snapping. "The Carolingians no longer rule France," someone said. I didn't answer. But I knew he was right. That night, the king's body was carried towards Saint-Denis. I rode beside Adalberon, Archbishop of Reims, his white vestments stained with travel. His hands trembled as he clutched his prayer beads. "What happens now?" I asked. He didn't look at me. He was watching the nobles behind us, each deep in thought, calculating, already reshaping the kingdom in their minds. "The crown cannot remain empty," he murmured. "But who will get it?" Everyone knew Charles of Lorraine. Louis's uncle was the legitimate heir, blood of Charlemagne, but his ties to the German emperor made him suspect. He was not trusted, not loved. He was too royal, too distant. And me, I was not Carolingian. I was Capet, son of Hugo the Great, grandson of Robert the Strong, Duke of the Franks, lord between the Loire and the Seine. My name meant strength to some, danger to others. I sat at their tables, drank their wine, argued with them in council. I was not above them. I was one of them. "The barons," Adalberon said, "fear a strong king. But they need someone who will hold the realm together, not a tyrant, a keystone." He turned toward me. His eyes were calm, yet deep as a well. "They need you." That night, alone in my tent, I couldn't sleep. The wind shifted the flap and the fire outside had burned low. Those words echoed in the silence. "They need you." I thought of my father, Hugo the Great, a man who could have taken the crown but never did. He ruled the realm from the shadows, made kings rise and fall, but never claimed the title for himself. "Why?" I whispered. "Why didn't you take it, father?" No answer came, only the night and the sound of my heartbeat. Was it wisdom or fear? And now the crown came to me, not by right, but by necessity. I was not the heir. I was the solution. Dawn broke, pale and cold. I stepped from the tent. The barons were already gathered, talking in tense groups. Their eyes flicked toward me, sharp with expectation. I walked into their circle, my voice even. "If you wish me to be king," I said, "then know this. I will accept, but I demand your oaths, sworn and sealed. For without your word, the crown means nothing." Silence. Then someone nodded. And in that moment, history pivoted. But I didn't yet know what price it would demand. They called my father Hugo the Great, not king, but greater than many who had worn the crown. He ruled without a throne, governed without a crown. His strength came not from titles, but from presence. Wherever he went, other men stood back. Even kings. I was just a boy, chasing his footsteps, trying to read his silences. My earliest memory of him was his voice, low, calm, firm as iron. "The crown," he once told me, "is a trap, not a prize. You wear it on your head, but it wraps around your neck." I didn't understand, I said, "But it means power." He smiled. "No, son. It means obligation. And fear. The more power you have, the more they will fear you. And when they fear you, they will wait for your misstep, and then they will strike." I carried those words with me like a stone in my pocket. As I grew, I watched him rule from behind the curtain. King Lothair sat the throne, but it was my father's nod the barons sought. He picked kings like chessmen, knowing when to move, when to remove. I often asked myself, why not him? Why did he never take it for himself? The answer came slowly. He ruled longer and more securely than many kings, not because he demanded loyalty, but because he gave it only when it served the realm. He had no crown, but he had power. And that terrified the men who did wear the crown. Now he was gone. And they came to me. I wasn't ready. Or maybe I was, but couldn't admit it. I kept his ring, plain, gold, worn smooth, on a cord around my neck. In moments of doubt, I would hold it, like a relic. That night, after Edelberon spoke those words, "They need you," I sat with the ring clenched in my fist. "Father," I whispered, "you refused the crown. But I can't. If I say no, Charles returns, and France becomes a province of the empire." No reply came, of course. But I felt something. Not approval, not warning, just a presence, a weight. The weight of a name. The next morning, I talked with Robert, my son. Still young, but old enough to understand the air had changed. "Will you become king?" he asked. I hesitated, then said, "Yes." He nodded with innocent certainty. "Then, one day I will too." The simplicity of it struck me like a blade. "Yes, son. But if I fail, there won't be a crown to pass." I looked at him and realized what I was fighting for wasn't just France. It was this boy's future. And if I could bear the weight, he might carry it better. We rode through our lands. The abbots and monks welcomed us with songs. Peasants bowed their heads as we passed. But their eyes, they didn't see a king. They saw a noble, a distant name. Their fears were local: bandits, famine, justice. The crown to them was mist on the river, visible but untouchable. And I wondered, what kind of king can I be if I'm invisible to the very people I'm meant to protect? But I remembered my father's words. Barons are enemies. The church is an ally, for a time. But the people? The people are a silent judge. They watch, and they remember. That night, beside a village fire, I whispered to the ring, "You were wise to avoid the crown, but I cannot." And I felt, not peace, but resolve. I would not rule like my father, but I would finish what he began, not as a shadow king, but as the founder of something real. The night before Senlis, I could not sleep. The tent was quiet. The hearth burned low. Outside, the wind pulled at the canvas like a restless messenger. I sat alone, polishing the hilt of my sword, not for war, but for something to do with my hands. I had made the choice. I would accept the crown if offered, but what I hadn't considered was what it would cost us. Her. Adelaide came in softly, her silhouette framed by the firelight. She wore no jewelry, no crown, just a wool cloak and a braid down her shoulder. Her face was calm, but her eyes read me like scripture. "You haven't slept," she said. "Nor have you," I replied. She knelt beside me, took the cloth from my hands, and set the sword aside. "You said yes," she said. Not a question, but a knowing. I nodded. Her hand touched mine. Warm. Steady. "Then everything will change." "Yes." She was silent for a moment. Then, with that strange, noble sadness I had come to love in her, she asked, "Will we still have time for us?" I turned toward her, and for once, I didn't speak like a king or a strategist. I spoke like the man who once kissed her in a garden before war came. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I will fight for that as fiercely as I fight for France." She smiled faintly, leaned forward, and kissed my brow. "Don't fight for me," she whispered. "Fight with me." And in that tent, with the scent of smoke and pine in the air, I let the crown disappear from my thoughts for a moment. We laid down together, not as king and queen, but as husband and wife. No court, no whispers. Just warmth, and the heartbeat of two people who knew that tomorrow would bring the world's gaze. But tonight, it was just ours. The world may never sing of it. But it was the only coronation I truly remember. So today we dive into the rise of Hugh Capet, a noble with royal blood, but no claim to the throne. But before we go on, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more cinematic stories of love, power, and real history. After that, leave a comment and let us know. What would you choose if you were in Hugh Capet's place? Stay in the shadows or risk everything to take the crown? Alright. Ready to meet the king who outsmarted a dynasty? Sinless. The stones of the assembly hall still held the morning chill when I entered. A thin fog hovered outside, but inside, tension hung thicker than incense. I looked around. Bishops in stiff robes, barons in cloaks of fur and velvet. Behind them, guards with spears. Every man here could make a king, or unmake one. The seat at the center of the hall stood empty. They had gathered not for ceremony, but judgment. The crown was vacant, and no law dictated who must wear it next. Archbishop Adalberon rose. The hall stilled. "Brothers," he said, voice solemn and clear, "the throne of France is without a ruler. We must choose, not by inheritance, but by wisdom. Let not bloodline blind us, but consider the strength and unity of the realm." I knew who he meant. I knew what he was doing, but Charles of Lorraine's name still echoed like a ghost. "He is the brother of King Lothaire," cried the Count of Meaux. "Nephew to Charles the Bald. He is Carolingian. He is France." The room murmured. A few men nodded. Old loyalties die hard. But others looked hesitant. Charles was tied to the emperor across the Rhine. A Carolingian, yes, but one who might sell France for a German coin. Adalberon raised a hand. "A king by blood may lose the people. A king by trust may hold them." And then the silence broke. A voice, calm, unshaking, spoke from the back. "What of Hugo?" I turned. All eyes turned with me. I stood slowly. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, but I kept my voice measured. "I do not demand your choice," I said, "but if you entrust me with the crown, know this. I will not rule by right of blood, but by right of duty. I will hold the kingdom together, not as master over you, but as your shield against those who seek to divide us." A long silence. Then the Duke of Normandy leaned forward. "He is one of us." "But he's not a Carolingian," someone shouted. Adalberon stepped forward, his voice like a hammer striking stone. "It is better to choose a man who will keep the kingdom whole than a name that may tear it apart." The words hung, echoed, sifted through every mind in the room. And then, one by one, they began to stand. The Count of Blois, the Duke of Anjou, even some who had once whispered Karl under their breath. Each spoke the same words. "I give my voice to Hugo." When the last voice rose in my favor, I bowed my head, but inside me I was not triumphant. I was cold, cautious. The crown was not yet on my brow, but already it pressed against my soul. They chose me, but they will watch me like hawks, every act judged, every mistake remembered. After the assembly, a baron brushed past me. He did not bow. He leaned close and said, almost kindly, "Congratulations, Capet. But remember, kings are not born. They're kept, and they're dropped when they fail." That night, I sat alone in my chamber. Outside, the torches flickered. I stared into the flame and whispered, "They chose me, but I will not let them forget why." Noyon Cathedral, July 3rd, 987. The bells rang like thunder. Outside, the square was filled with people. Peasants, monks, barons, beggars, all jostling, all craning their necks. Inside, beneath the vaulted arches, light streamed through stained glass. Incense burned so thick it made my eyes water. The crown waited on the altar like a trap disguised as treasure. Archbishop Adelberon looked at me. "Are you ready?" he whispered. I gave the only answer I could. "Yes." But inside a second voice hissed. "Liar. You're not ready. No one ever is." They dressed me in the garments of kingship, white tunic for purity, purple cloak for power, golden spurs for justice, a sword too heavy for ceremony. Then the oil touched my forehead. My knees buckled, not from the weight of ritual, but from the weight of expectation. And finally, the crown. When it settled on my brow, the room seemed to tilt. I gripped the edge of the altar to steady myself. The choir sang. The barons clapped their gauntlets. The crowd outside roared, but I heard only one sound, the silence of the treasury. Later, in a small chamber behind the cathedral, I sat across from the royal treasurer. He laid out scrolls on the table. His expression was tight, like a man apologizing before he spoke. "These are the crown's holdings," he said. The list was pitiful. A few manors between Compiègne and Orléans. Some rights to tolls, a vineyard, the rents from a half-dozen market towns. "That's all?" I asked. He bowed his head. "The Carolingians left little behind. Most of the kingdom belongs to dukes and counts." I stared at the crown lying on the table beside the scrolls, gold, jewels, and nothing underneath. "So I am king," I said, "but poorer than half my vassals." That night I didn't sleep. I sat by the window, watching the moon through the slits in the stone. The candlelight flickered. The crown cast long shadows. I am a king without coin, without soldiers, without land. But I had one thing they did not. The people had seen me crowned. The church had anointed me. The barons had sworn. Grudgingly, yes, but sworn. And where oaths exist, leverage begins. The next morning I walked the cloisters with Robert. He was still too young to grasp the weight on my shoulders. "Father," he said, "when will we build castles like the ones in Normandy?" I smiled faintly. "First, we build something better. Trust." He frowned. "But trust isn't made of stone." "No," I said. "It's harder and more fragile." In the courtyard, a baron passed me. He bowed with perfect politeness, but behind his eyes was calculation. How long will Capet last? And I realized then, I had no wealth, no army, no authority that could not be taken away. But I had their curiosity, and from curiosity comes fear, and from fear comes time. I would not be a king of strength. I would be a king of patience, and I would survive. After the crown came reality. The scrolls spoke plainly. I was king of almost nothing. My realm stretched like a river in drought. Thin, disconnected, vulnerable. Orleans was mine. A few manors. A handful of abbeys that prayed louder than they paid. But surrounding me were giants. Normandy, Aquitaine, Flanders. Barons who ruled like sovereigns, who minted their own coins, led their own armies, judged their own courts. I wore a crown, yes, but they held the keys to the kingdom. I had climbed the mountain only to find I was standing in a valley. I remember riding to Normandy that autumn. The road passed through lands that were mine only in theory. Fields were worked by peasants who barely looked up when my banner passed. In the towns, they sang songs of dukes, not kings. When I arrived, the Duke of Normandy greeted me at the gate. "Welcome, my lord," he said, bowing just deep enough to be courteous, but not humble. His castle overlooked a river, and his men stood in ranks, armed, armored, disciplined. I counted more knights at his table than I could raise in all my lands. We feasted. He served wine in silver goblets, game roasted over coals, musicians playing lutes. But beneath the hospitality, I heard it clearly. "Here, I rule. You are my guest. We spoke at night, walking along the battlements. You'll have peace from me, he said. As long as you let me rule my lands as I see fit, I answered. I don't want to govern Normandy. I want to govern France. He smiled. Then let's agree. You stay king and I stay free. It was the same in the north. In Flanders, they were ruled by a boy, Baldwin IV, but behind him stood older men, sharp-eyed regents with long memories. They bowed, they made pledges, but I felt the hollowness in their oaths. In Aquitaine, even worse. The Duke there was a world away, closer to Spain than to me. He spoke of trade with Moors and visions of the south. France, to him, was an afterthought. There was no rebellion, no battles, just polite indifference. It was not hatred I feared, it was disregard. Yet amid this, I saw my advantage. They feared a strong king. But I was not strong. I was manageable, familiar, predictable. And so they tolerated me. I didn't command them. I coordinated. I didn't threaten. I listened. I didn't claim sovereignty. I became the glue between sovereigns. And in doing so, I survived. At night, I would sit by the fire with my knights and ask, what makes a king real? One said, an army. Another, land. I shook my head. A king is real when others need him more than he needs them. In the villages, the peasants spoke little of kings. They wanted food, safety, justice. I could not give them all, but I could give them hope. A name, a thread that linked one province to another, and perhaps, in time, they would believe in that name more than in any crown. My kingdom was like a tent, every baron a rope pulling in a different direction, but as long as they didn't pull too hard, the tent would hold. And I, poor, landless, crowned by necessity, would become the one they could not do without. We had been riding for days. No banners, no trumpets. Just a handful of guards and the quiet creak of saddles. I wanted to see the land, not from a throne, but from the ground. We passed forests where the wolves still howled at night, fields already gray with frost, villages wrapped in wood smoke and straw. I told no one I was king. I wore no royal colors. Just a worn cloak, a hood, and silence. The village was called Monsendre. It had no lord's tower, no stone chapel, just huts huddled around a muddy square, and a small wooden cross planted in the earth like hope. Children ran barefoot through puddles, chickens scattered beneath a cart. A toothless old man sharpened scythes while muttering a hymn. And there was the smell. Wet hay, old bread, sweat, dung. Not unpleasant. Just real. A woman was baking near a communal oven. Her sleeves were rolled, her hands white with flour. She didn't look up when I approached. Cold day, I said. Better than yesterday, she replied. No one died. She offered a piece of bread. Flat, coarse, but warm. I took it. Thank you, I said. She shrugged. We share, or we starve. Nearby, a man was splitting logs. His hands were red from the cold. A child with a crooked leg limped after goats. A girl was feeding scraps to a blackened cat. And still, they laughed. Teased. Sang snatches of old songs. There was no mention of kings. No news from the court. They didn't know who ruled them, and barely cared. Their fears were local. Wolves, winter, illness. Their hopes were simpler. A harvest that didn't rot. A roof that didn't leak. A child who lived. That evening, I sat near their fire. A priest read from a worn psalter. The people bowed their heads. And when he said, God bless the king, I saw some look up, confused. Who is the king now? Whispered a boy. Does it matter? Answered the baker. The others chuckled. And in that moment, I understood something sharper than politics. They don't need a strong king. They need a present one. When I rode out the next morning, I left nothing behind but a coin on the oven and a prayer in the chapel. They would never remember my name, but I would remember theirs, because it was for them that I needed to build something that would last. Not gold, not swords, continuity. If they remembered nothing else, they would remember that one year led to another, and that a king didn't always need to be seen to be felt. With each passing year, I saw the truth more clearly. My kingship was not a throne. It was a balancing act. I had no army to impose myself, no treasury to buy loyalty, no divine blood to awe them. My only strength was that the barons preferred me to each other. But what would happen when I died? Would they elect another? Would Charles's ghost rise again from the east? Would Robert be passed over like a forgotten page in a dying book? That I could not allow. One night in Orléans, I sat with Adalberon in a quiet hall lit by only 2 candles. The cold from the stone floor crept into my bones. "You've held them together," he said. "But only just. If you die, they'll scatter again, like wolves in winter." I said nothing. He leaned forward. "Make Robert king now, not after your death. Now. While you still breathe, let them swear to him, while they still remember why they swore to you." I looked at him. "He is young, too young." He smiled. "And yet old enough to carry a crown." I walked alone that night, past the silent cloisters, the monks, chants distant. I heard my own steps echoing in the dark. What father wishes this burden for his son? What man wants his child to wear a crown that chokes? But I knew. If I died without securing the future, everything I'd built would dissolve like mist. My fear whispered, "They won't accept him." But my resolve answered, "Then make them accept him." The next morning I summoned Robert. He entered simply, his cloak half fastened, his face alert. "Do you know what power is?" I asked him. He paused. "Strength?" "No," I said. "It's the illusion of strength. Power is what people think you have, and they only believe it if you act before they expect it." He said nothing, just waited. So I told him, "You will be crowned. Soon, while I still live. Not as a shadow, but as a king." He looked startled, but proud. "I'm ready," he said. Then softer, "Will they follow me?" "They will," I replied, "if they think refusing you means losing me." December 25, 987, Reims. The cathedral echoed with song and incense. The people believed it was Christmas Mass. But the barons knew. The real gift was ambition cloaked in tradition. Adalberon lifted his hand. "By the will of God and the trust of the realm, Robert, son of King Hugo, shall be crowned." The crown touched his head, and in that moment a dynasty began. Not a family of divine right, but of strategy, of necessity, of survival. The nobles applauded. But I watched their eyes. Some smiled. Others studied. They knew what I'd done. They knew they were trapped. That night, Robert sat beside me, still stunned. "They looked at me," he said. "Like I was a man now." I nodded. "That's because you are. And now, even if I die, you live. And through you, so does our name." I slept well that night. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of the crown lessen. Not because it was lighter, but because it no longer rested on me alone. After Reims, we rode. Not to parade. Not to celebrate. To secure. A crown on a boy's head means nothing without the voices of men. And so Robert and I went, castle to castle, hall to hall, to hear their oaths with our own ears and see in their eyes what words would never reveal. It was winter, and the roads were mud. The banners flapped in the wind like warnings. My crown was still bright, but the kingdom was dark and cold. Flanders came first. The boy Baldwin IV had been made count, but it was his guardians who ruled. The regent, a hard-eyed knight with a voice like gravel, received us in a hall that smelled of damp stone and guarded intentions. The child knelt. "I, Baldwin, swear loyalty to King Hugo and Prince Robert." The words were clean, but behind him the bishop nodded slowly, and the knight didn't bow. I leaned down, looked into the boy's face. "We accept your oath," I said, "and we'll remember who made it." Normandy was brighter, but no less sharp. The Duke stood at the riverbank as we arrived. His castle glinted on the cliffs behind him. His knights lined the walls like statues. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who didn't need a king but preferred to have one who didn't interfere. "I will swear," he said, "but my lands are mine." "And my title is mine," I replied. "Neither of us will forget." We shared wine that night. We laughed. We hunted. But he was watching me. I was watching him. We both knew. Loyalty was a contract of fear, not love. And yet, none refused. Some hesitated. Some muttered. Some looked at Robert with disdain. But none turned away. Because I had made myself small enough not to threaten, but solid enough not to be ignored. A useful king. A cautious king. A king who didn't try to rule them, only hold them together. One night in the tent, Robert asked, "Father, why do they kneel if they don't respect us?" I stared into the fire. "Because," I said, "they fear each other more than they doubt me. I am their balance. Remove me, and they fight. So long as I'm here, they pretend to be one." He nodded, slowly. And I saw in his eyes the beginning of understanding. In private, I wrote a list. Not of enemies, but of temperaments. The barons who needed flattery. The ones who needed distance. The ones who could be bribed with land. The ones who responded to silence. No swords. No battles. Just patience. And memory. My kingdom wasn't built on victories. It was built on waiting. And when the last baron pledged, when the final hall closed behind us, I looked at Robert and said, "They have bent the knee, but their hearts still belong to themselves." He asked, "Then how do we win them?" I answered, "Not by taking, by enduring." France was quiet, but it was not safe. My barons had sworn oaths, yes, but their swords were never far from reach. And beyond our borders, others watched, some with curiosity, others with hunger. The Ottonian Empire loomed like a storm on the horizon. To the east, beyond the forests, young Emperor Otto III was still a child, but the court around him whispered of Francia, the old dream. The Holy Roman Empire wanted not just lands, but legitimacy, and Charles of Lorraine, imprisoned, silenced, was still their piece on the board. Even in chains, Charles was dangerous, because he reminded them and everyone else that I was not of noble blood, not a Carolingian, not royal by birth, just Capet. In the south, Aquitaine drifted. Their dukes ruled lands richer than mine, vaster than mine, older than my dynasty. They dreamed not of Paris or Reims, but of the Pyrenees and beyond. Spain was their prize, Moorish lands, Christian conquests. When I sent letters, they answered, but late. When I sent requests, they nodded, but did nothing. One letter from the Duke of Aquitaine read, "The king is far, my enemies are near." That was how they saw me. Far, distant, decorative, and Normandy. The Duke smiled in my presence, drank my wine, spoke oaths into the cathedral air. But his shipwrights were building faster than ever. His men, trained by the sea, his traders dealt with England. His eyes looked not north to me, but west across the Channel. The King of France was no more than a name. He had everything I did not. Silver, soldiers, ambition. I remember one night I stood alone atop the ramparts of Orléans. The stars hung low. The air was sharp. Below, the river curled like a sleeping serpent. I whispered, "I am surrounded by giants." And then, like a revelation, But none of them are king. They were stronger, richer, more feared. But they were all still dukes, counts, regents. Only I wore the crown. Only I stood between their ambitions and open war. Not because I ruled them, but because they needed me not to rule them. I was the knot in the rope. Cut me out, and everything frayed. In council I said to my advisors, "We cannot outfight them." They looked grim. One said, "Then how do we survive?" I answered, "We outlast them. They have armies, but armies exhaust. They have gold, but gold corrupts. They have dreams, but dreams blind. I have patience, and patience is a crown they will never wear." Robert asked me once, "Do you think they fear you?" I answered, "No, but they fear each other, and that makes me necessary." I was not the strongest man in France, but I was the only man whose weakness made him essential. That was my armor, and it was enough. I spent more time on horseback than on the throne. Kings in stories sit on golden chairs, issue decrees, hold court in halls of marble. But I lived from saddle to saddle, from cloister to cloister, from abbey hearth to baron's hall, because that was the only way to stay king. I had no fixed capital. Paris was not mine. Laon was dangerous. Reims belonged to the church. Orléans, small, quiet, fragile. So I moved constantly. I lived where the wind took me, or where rumor pushed me. A plot in the north? I arrived before it bloomed. A whisper in the south? I prayed in their churches the next morning. They thought I was cautious. In truth, I was everywhere because I could not afford to not be. I lived off harvests, not from estates, but from hospitality. I brought my court to the nobles and let them host their king. Their kitchens fed me. Their monks sheltered me. Their treasuries bore my visits like taxes. But I offered something in return: proximity to power. And that was worth more than coin. The truth was simple. I had almost nothing. But everyone owed me something. A favor. A promise. A visit returned. A look remembered. Kings who rule with swords must always sharpen them. I ruled with symbols. A banner lifted over a tower. A prayer said in my name. A child named after me. These were my conquests. One monk in Tours asked me, "Do you not tire of wandering?" I smiled. Only those with strong roots can afford to stand still. I created no palaces. I built no great roads. But I left behind something greater than monuments: a habit. Of calling me king. Of calling Robert heir. Of turning to us when trouble stirred. Little by little, the name Capet began to mean not just a man, but a center, a pattern, a pulse. Even those who mocked me did so as king. One winter, I returned to a village I had passed years before. They no longer stared. They nodded. Children waved. The priest called me by name, not as Hugo, Duke of the Franks, but as our king. That day I understood. It wasn't land that made a king. It was recognition. The Carolingians had ruled by blood. I ruled by memory. In the end, they forgot that I was once elected. And that was my victory. Because once the people forget that the crown was borrowed, then it is theirs. And once it's theirs, they will never let it go. I feel the weight in my chest now, not from the crown, but from the years. The cold comes quicker, the steps are heavier, and the nights stretch longer than they used to. But I'm not afraid. I've lived through fear. I ruled with fear. And now, in the stillness of my final days, I understand what it gave me. When I first wore the crown, they called me temporary. A choice. A placeholder. A man to hold the reins until a real king could be found. I heard it in whispers, saw it in the glances of barons, Felt it in the way the emperor's envoy spoke to me. Measured, polite, but not deferent. And now? Now I lie in Orléans. Sick, yes. Weakened. But not defeated. Outside these walls, France still breathes. Not in unity, but in rhythm. And it breathes my name. Charles of Lorraine is dead. The last Carolingian spark. Extinguished. No more rivals by blood. No more pretenders with old scrolls and ancient names. I outlived him not because I was stronger, but because I knew when not to fight. He raised banners. I raised patience. He trusted birthright. I trusted time. Robert sits beside me now. Crowned, respected, obeyed, if not by fear, then by tradition. He is the second Capet. And there will be more, because I did not build an empire. I built a pattern. Election became inheritance. Fear became habit. Habit became legacy. Father, Robert said to me yesterday, do you regret not taking more? More land? More cities? I shook my head. No. What I took, I kept. And what I kept, I passed on. He didn't understand it yet. But one day he will. To hold power is one thing. To pass it on, that is kingship. I close my eyes and remember the forest where Louis fell. The silence after his death. The archbishop's voice. They need you. My own trembling hand, lifted before the nobles. And now, the memory is still. The line is unbroken. The man they needed is now the name they follow. I came into the hall as a duke. I leave as a dynasty. Thank you for listening. So what do you think? Was Hugh Capet a brilliant founder, or just the smartest guy in the room at the right time? Drop your take in the comments. And while you're here, check out more stories from the Dynasty.